Welcome to Entrepreneur State of Mind. I'm your host, Dr. Dale Caldwell, and I have someone that I've gotten to know very well and I'm working with, Niurca Louis, the National Coordinator of the Entrepreneur Zone program. Niurca, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to today.
Well, you're one of the third or fourth that I've had in studio, so I'm really excited about having you in studio and other people in studio. And so I always like to begin with the origin stories. You know, I'm a big Marvel Universe fan, and I like the origin stories. So now, where were you born, and where did you go to school, and how did you get into kind of the focus on community?
Wow. So I was born in New York City, in Brooklyn. My parents are both immigrants from the Dominican Islands, and I spent most of my life following my father as a United Methodist pastor.
Me too.
Yes, and they get moved from location to location, and so I had the opportunity to grow up in a very unique way, really getting familiar with different kinds of towns, rural, urban, city, suburban, wealthy communities, very, very impoverished communities. And so I have this upbringing that allowed me to just meet and understand the way that folks live across our country in different ways. And so that coupled with this sense of in the Bible, it says the poor will always be with you. And I believe that that is in our nature, or at least in mine, to care for them and to care for the poor in our communities. I found that in our society, concentrated poverty is one of the greatest ills that we have in the way that we are structured and have structured our communities purposefully. And so thinking about ways to address concentrated poverty is really important, but then never forgetting the humanity in all of our communities and the richness of all of the very diverse cultures. And so, you know, there's a danger in doing community work where folks want to instill their own values in every community, and every community ought to be, you know, like mine, say for instance, or whatever in the mindset might be. But you know, we would not have some of the rich art and music that has come from many of our different types of cultures, whether rural or urban.
Absolutely,
so, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, my dad, as some of the audience knows, was a Methodist minister, and so as well. And so the Methodist Church moved folks around about every 5 years, and so the goal was that the congregation had a relationship with God, not the minister.
That's right. And
so that's why. So I'm, you know, we're both brats of moving around. I was Northeast, and so on, and so that explains the real focus. But you really have just a great understanding of a lot of the details and the grassroots and the challenges that people in these communities have. And so, well, how does this relate to entrepreneurship? Well, it relates to entrepreneurship because I started this program with Entrepreneur Zones and got to know Niurca and really asked her to be the national coordinator. And we'll talk a little more about where that's going. But entrepreneurship is the foundation of really turning around these communities of poverty. And so the entrepreneurial state of mind isn't just about making money for me. It's really about transforming communities, and you've just done an amazing job of really doing that. And so let's talk a little bit about your background working in communities over the years, which is extensive.
Thank you. Yeah, I have had over 20 years experience working in and with communities on their community development, community wellness, and well-being, and have spent time in many different kinds of communities doing that work. And one of the foundational pieces or components to really executing that work well is place and power, and making sure that the people who are of that community have a seat at the table and are not just at the table, but really holding power with decision makers, so that whatever is being decided, whatever gets built, whatever gets changed, is being done so with their mindset in place, because otherwise, the most well-intentioned of individuals will certainly get it wrong, because the people who live in the communities really have an expertise, an understanding of what it is that they need and what it is that they want and how they can get to a place of thriving.
Well, see, and that's an important point, because so often policy is one side or the other, and both are wrong. One is, well, I made it, they need to just make it, we don't need to help them. The other one is, they're so broken that they can't think on their own, I got to tell them what to do.
Right.
And both are destructive, and some would say one's conservative, one's liberal, but really in the middle is, and the term that I use, because terms are important, is this people up, not bottom up. People talk about top down. Well, top down is where they know it's wrong, but it's not bottom up, because to me that's derogatory of the people. It's really people up. It's really empowering people and making people feel that they are part of the decision. And anybody that's an effective leader knows that you may have an idea, but it's not going to stick unless you help people think that the idea is their own. Mm-hmm. And so that's been good. Now, you were an assistant commissioner and a New Jersey department. Talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, after spending quite some time working in communities here in New Jersey, I spent some time working for the Department of Children and Families as the Assistant Commissioner for Family and Community Partnerships, which is quite fitting. And that work is deeply, deeply important and very impactful in terms of really being someone who came from the community in the sense that one of the communities that I lived in for a very long time was Camden City. Mm-hmm. And so, you're not just placed in the community to serve that community as a child of a pastor, but you're there and you're part of that community. Right. And so the sense of being part of these various different communities really allowed for the decisions that I and my team were making to really come from a place of understanding, and then also to slow down our decision making to make sure that we were connecting with folks on the ground, with folks in the communities. It can be really challenging to do that because there's so much to accomplish in certain roles, but it's absolutely critical if we're going to get it right.
Well, one of the things too, and this idea of urban traumatic stress disorder, that there's a trauma of living in poverty in urban areas that affects the amygdala part of the brain, has nothing to do with how smart somebody is, and so when you're doing community work, you've got to take that into account. You've got to do that, and you obviously do that and have done that in the past. We won't talk about some of the horror stories, but there are a lot of horror stories where kids are taken away, and are really not helped in many ways. And we don't want to go into specifics necessarily, but you saw some of that. You saw how government intervention isn't always, appropriate.
Well, in fact, as I was coming on, and even still, the department itself is engaged in communicating how removing children from their families can be most of the time more harmful than having left them where they were, and is thinking through opportunities to support children with their families and make change for that family at their place where they are, as opposed to removing that child. And so what would it take to do that? It's extraordinarily disruptive, not only to the family, but to the entire upbringing of that child when they grow up and have no connections to extended family and cousins and aunts and all of that rich history and diversity of your own culture can be lost, and often is. And so there's so much to think about there and unpack, but they're being thoughtful about what to do and how to do that. So my division was called the prevention division. So it's about preventing that from occurring in the first place. And so that caused a lot of our work to be thinking about communities and how they're designed or not, that would provide a healthy space for children and families to thrive. And oftentimes, because of concentrated poverty, because of systemic issues that we have throughout our communities and their strategic design, families are left without the right, I would even say, the ability to access the kinds of environments that would allow them to thrive. And so that's really critical and important.
No, yeah, absolutely, and you've just really been in the trenches doing that. One of the things that excites me about your work and understanding is the idea of the family. I think a lot of the top-down policies are about the individual. Well, we're going to pull this individual out. We're going to, this is a horrible community, so we're just going to pluck this person out and do that. And they don't realize, because they don't have the empathy, that they had a family support network. Why would they think that other folks don't need that family support network? And so part of the reason that I came up with the idea of the entrepreneur zones is this idea of how do we fuel this change?
Yes.
Government is really inadequate, and certainly financially, operationally, to really do it all. And so that's the idea. And so when I was first talking to you about entrepreneur zones, talk to us a little bit about what was going through your head as we talked about that idea.
Well, it really provides the, first of all, when I first listened to the scope of the entrepreneur zones, it just lit up my spirit, because it really puts the individuals in the place of power. It is about the individual being able to create the kind of impact and change in their own life and in their own family. It gives them the sense of autonomy and place. And it's so important to pull folks into their own potential. And so that is beautiful. I also understand that a lot of our urban communities, because of issues of mass incarceration, folks are not able to access the kinds of employment that they would have otherwise been able. So folks think, oh, well, why wouldn't they just get a job or so on? But because of some certain kinds of issues, that has not been a choice for many people. And even when folks can be employed, there's a huge bias from employers on folks who have some involvement with the justice.
With the justice and other things. So let's start. We're going to take a quick break for commercial. I want to pick that up because the whole idea that people don't understand some of the challenges that will limit your ability to even get a job. So,
absolutely.
So we'll be right back with Entrepreneur State of Mind after this short commercial break.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Boardwalks built for fun. Legendary rock and roll clubs.
This is how we do it. Hippity hop.
Casinos by the ocean.
Hippity hop.
Now that's New Jersey. 130 miles.
Welcome back to Entrepreneur State of Mind. I'm here with Niurca Louis, who is the National Director of the Entrepreneur Zone program. We're really talking about entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial mindset, and poverty, and as we're going forward. So before the break, we're talking about the challenge that people have in jobs. And you grew up in Camden, and I created this thing called the Living Wage Index, which is a percentage of households. And I remember Camden across the country had the lowest rate. There was only 37% of the households made enough money to pay their bills. So Camden, in many ways, was the poorest community in the country. Well, the reality of that, if only 37%, people had to survive. So they had to survive by doing things that interacted with the police.
Right.
Then they do something that interacts with the police just to survive, not to be mean. Then they go the incarceration system. They come out, they can't get a job because they have a record.
Right.
And so they're forced to go back to a life of crime. And it really is, and it's amazing how people just don't understand that. Talk more about that, because you've been at the grassroots level and seen that firsthand.
Yeah, so, incarceration, mass incarceration, and, just concentrated poverty really creates enormous challenges for the individuals who our society are meant to provide the kinds of resources to support. And so whether it's the education systems not being strong enough, the housing systems failing, the expense of housing, access to food. You'd be surprised how many communities that fit the urban or rural poverty context here in New Jersey don't have access to healthy fruits and vegetables on a regular basis, and just the green space, just all of that lived environment is there to either support your well-being and mental health and support your upbringing or not. And so when we do not afford individuals the right to live in a healthy environment holistically, we then reap as a society what we sow as a society. And so it is incumbent upon us to think about our brethren, to think about our neighbor, be it in our own towns or in communities across the country, like with entrepreneur zones. And so with entrepreneur zones and this idea of being able to create business ownership with individuals across the country who, for all intents and purposes, have been left behind, matters hugely. Ownership in and of itself is the number one thing that someone can do to close the wealth gap. Both ownership of an enterprise, a business, but then also ownership of homes. And so you sort of need a base income to be able to then be a homeowner and all of those types of things. And so really, really critical piece of the puzzle or step in that ladder from the people up concept to allow for people to come into their own potential.
Well, one of the things, and I'm kind of a mad scientist coming up with different ideas, and so I really like to look at all of the problem. And so as it came up with the Entrepreneur Zone idea, and you're just doing an amazing job, and we're talking to Tulsa and New Orleans and Atlanta and Philadelphia, and then we've got this committee at the state of New Jersey, the Entrepreneur Zone committee that I'm chairing with that. And so as we look at that, and you and I had a conversation that maybe we need, in addition to that, this other project of how do we keep score and so you'll be pleased. So the last couple of days, when I'm in the morning, I've been writing this morning as well. And so I got the website. She laughs because I have a million websites, so we get this. So the Community Prosperity Score. Right. So the CPS. And so the idea is, we ask, we need to know what our stock is doing. We want to know what our baseball, football, basketball team is doing. we want to track, the voting, but we don't track the well-being of our communities,
Right.
which is much more important than all of those things, as important as they are. And so, so we have these 54 measures in, the healthy society, economy, environment, and individual, emotional, rational, and physical health. And one of the things I'm thinking, because as you said, every community is different, let them identify their measures for
Right.
each of those. And
Yeah.
then from that, we can actually do that. But I think you'll like, and we use this Rubik's Cube to really show the various sides, but I think you'll like this because it fits well with the entrepreneur zones, because we're going to have measures there, but that's only a piece of it.
Right.
Right? It's not going to be all of it. So I think I think you're going to see this entrepreneurial mindset is going to help to transform communities.
Absolutely. It is absolutely right on target. It is a piece of that, and there's so many different components to what create a healthy community, healthy well-being for the families and individuals in communities. And thinking about, I absolutely love the idea of creating a space, an opportunity for communities themselves to select what it is that their well-being measurements will be.
Absolutely.
What are those items that matter to, Pennsauken versus Salem County versus, or Salem City, Penns Grove, Camden City, Winslow Township, many different communities, and they're vastly different and have such rich history and so much to offer. And so it's really great to allow and give space and voice for individuals to be the experts in their own life. And what does well-being mean to me and to us as a community? That's perfect.
And now you sent there was an email over the weekend, and which talked about measurement. Well,
Yes.
talk a little bit about that for the audience, because I thought that fits so perfectly for what we're talking about.
Absolutely. So there is a lot of momentum around researchers, data analysts, to talk about how much information is being collected on all of us, and how that information is being used. So ethics, but then ways to think about how to engage individuals in that collection, how to
Right.
ask them for permission about that, how to make sure that they're part of the process before, during, and after, to really understand the data that's being collected on them for research purposes, for them to have inclusion in that. I've even heard some concepts about having people with lived experience serve on IRBs to be able to hear from them
Right.
before you design the entire study. And so there's this concept of, and I'm no expert by any means, though a big fan, this triple bottom line framework that looks at data from the social, data qualities, and then also environmental, but then combining those, or thinking about how to combine those with economic, knowing that what we have and what motivates us and the things that we measure are the things that are easy to measure. The more challenging things are difficult, right? The richness in our society, the well-being. And so thinking deeply about how to measure well-being, health in ways that are not monetized only.
Right, right. And part of what I'm looking at are actually the increases. So it's really looking at, rather than an absolute number, to say, well, there's a metric of, or reduction, poverty rates. And
Right.
so, we've reduced poverty rates and other things. And so, so the idea too is, as we've talked about, this Entrepreneur Zone is going to hopefully bring in a whole bunch of other folks to really look at the community as we would look at a business.
Right.
It's just amazing how much money we spend looking at businesses. We look at, yet we don't spend it at looking at communities as a collective.
Right.
Now, and these shows always go so quickly, so before we go, one of the projects that we're working on, which is really kind of a kickoff of the Entrepreneur Zones, is the May 30th, Tulsa, Oklahoma remembrance of the race massacre when more than 300 people were killed, and a black community through entrepreneurship, thrived in the time of segregation. So it's a model that proves our entrepreneur zones work.
Yeah.
This idea that focusing on supporting and growing entrepreneurship can transform struggling communities to extraordinarily successful communities. So talk a little bit about, and then let me say this, we're having on May 30th, we're going to have a stream but also a live for VIP event in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the Hyatt in Tulsa. So we'll make sure to get more information about that. But talk a little bit about entrepreneurship in Tulsa and kind of your perspective.
Absolutely. So, so in Tulsa, as you just so eloquently stated, 100 years ago, come June, there was a community thriving and having their own businesses. 7 families had airplanes, as you know. They were just, not just doing well, they were beyond thriving, right? They were wealthy.
They were living the American dream.
Yes, yes, indeed. And so they were very wealthy as families. And so that community had gone through a tragic bombing 100 years ago, and so understanding how that occurred and the history of that is really important. So I encourage you all to look that up, but understanding that the economics, the support, the environment that was created, this ecosystem of individuals who were supporting each other's businesses, is really a part of, a big piece of the framework for the entrepreneur zones. Right. And creating this holistic approach where the businesses designed in a particular community are based off of the assets of that community, what's there that's really, really fantastic and going well that will allow that E-zone to thrive, and then what are the needs? What's missing in the economy or the supply chain in a particular community that would, when created with a new business owner or within that ecosystem, that would move the needle forward with regard to entrepreneurship and that E-zone thriving. And so it's really important to be thoughtful and planful about that design, to co-design that with the new business owners, the existing business owners, and the various different stakeholders in the community. It takes the entire community to be a stakeholder in that, and so you might want to even think about it as a shareholder. They may not have the traditional shareholder kind of relationship, but when you think about how an entrepreneur zone can begin to move the needle in terms of the economics of a community, the tax revenue in a community, the living wage that people begin to earn in a community, all of that pours into that community's ability to care for everyone else.
And that was a perfect example of that. And unfortunately, we're at the end of time, but there are 2 websites. So the DaleCaldwellFoundation.org, you can find Entrepreneur Zone information. And the group we're talking about in Tulsa, the Black Excellence Alliance, and Niurca and I are co-founders of blackexcellence.org. So blackexcellence.org, DaleCaldwellFoundation.org. I hope you will check that out, because that's using the entrepreneurial state of mind to transform America, which will benefit everybody.
Absolutely.
So Niurca, thank you so very much for coming, and I want to thank the audience for watching Entrepreneur State of Mind. We will see you next week.